if you look at the history of the Adventist Church, and you look at the history of publishing, and you look at the history of Pacific Press, they really are all tied together, especially in the Western United States.
The Adventist Church message actually came to California in 1859, 4 years before we officially became a church, when Merritt Kellogg came to San Francisco and organized a small group of Sabbath keepers. And then the first missionaries arrived with elders Loughborough and Bordeaux in 1868, and they began to hold evangelistic meetings in the northern part of California, leading to a lot of baptisms and a lot of growth.
So James and Ellen White make their way to California in the early 1870s. They see the need for a paper, and James White decides to start publishing a new paper in addition to the Review and Herald. Now, he's the editor of the Review and Herald, so he's not engaging in something that's going to undermine the Review, rather it's going to complement the Review.
And on June 4, 1874, published the first issue of Signs of the Times magazine. Now, sometimes we think of Signs of the Times that all they were talking about is the end of the world. Then one of his stated purposes, he said, through this, we hope to erect pulpits in every home presenting the gospel of Christ.
Because Signs came kind of first, and then Pacific Press was the outgrowth to help publish that magazine.
At the fall of 1874, in September, there was a camp meeting in Yountville, California, right along the Napa River, and the General Conference President, Elder G.I. Butler, came to that camp meeting, and they made an appeal that we wanted our own publishing house on the West Coast. Elder Butler called for the offering.
And in response to that, the believers see the potential of having a press on the West Coast, and so they will raise $19,414.
So a small group at camp meeting sacrificed to start publishing to share the gospel.
That creates the conduit through which they're able to have the means to be able to do that in a way that not only running a periodical, but other literature, it's cost effective, and we begin to see Adventism beginning to blossom.
There were converts that were coming into the church because of it. There were people who were using this material in their outreach. By 1904, they had outgrown their facilities, and Oakland was becoming too big of a town. And we as Adventists love to get out into the country, and so they began a search, and they found orchards, farmland out in Mountain View, California, which today is the Silicon Valley. But in those days, it was farmland. And they moved out there, built a facility, and had lots of room to grow and expand.
It seems like there isn't a grand old Adventist institution that hasn't had a natural disaster, especially a fire. The Review and Herald Publishing Association building had a fire back in Battle Creek. The Battle Creek Sanitarium had a fire. The institution that became Southern Adventist University was destroyed by fire. And Pacific Press also suffered from natural disasters.
The famous 1906 earthquake on April 18 of 1906, with San Francisco just a few miles north, Pacific Press ended up having quite a bit of damage. But even with all the damage, and in an era long before computers and storage and redundancies, Signs of the Times was still a weekly magazine, but they never missed an issue. They were able to keep putting out Signs of the Times. In fact, they put out 3 special earthquake issues that people sold on the street corners, people shared with their neighbors, that here is one of the signs that Jesus is coming soon. They quickly repaired the damage, and in June of that year, 1906, they made an official request to the city of Mountain View to put in fire hydrants right near Pacific Press. Well, that request wasn't acted upon quickly, and they were never put in that year. And in July 20, Pacific Press caught on fire and burned to the ground. Once again, The resiliency of the press workers, the resiliency of the church workers out in California, they rebuilt, they kept the press moving forward, and once again, never missed an issue of Signs of the Times, and kept putting out material to share God's word. And over the next 80 years in Mountain View, expansion continued. There's so many stories that can be told of the people, the times, and what happened during those years. But as they came into the 1970s, things were beginning to change around Mountain View. Number of items put Pacific Press in such a precarious situation that many felt that it would never survive. Some even saying it only had 18 months to survive if they stayed in Mountain View, California.
So it was a critical time for Pacific Press. We did a search, and it was after a lot of thought, a lot of study, a lot of prayer, that Treasure Valley in Idaho was selected. And then within Treasure Valley, it emerged that the Nampa location, which is just a beautiful location on the interstate freeway with a nice lake on it and everything, became the viable place to build Pacific Press.
And for the last 40 years, we've been here in Nampa, Idaho, and God has blessed, expanded. So we've looked at technologies. Not only do we print books, but there are ebooks, there are audio books. There are ways that we look about getting the message out to people today that our early pioneers never would have imagined. And they were the ones who wanted to find ways to reach people with a message of a loving, caring, soon-coming Christ. Right from the very beginning of Pacific Press, it's been about people. People who have edited books, people who have printed books, people who have bound books, people who have shipped books. It doesn't matter what part of the publishing house that you walk through. It's not just a person that's working here, but it's multiple generations of families, children, grandchildren of employees that come and work here because they see that what is done here is not just a human endeavor, it's not just a job. It really is the outreach of the Adventist Church.
And you have people like Bernardo Siniceros who worked there, moved up from Mountain View, was in the engineering department, just a terrific fellow, committed to the ministry of Pacific Press. And now you've got his son is now there working. Bernardo's passed, but Omar, his son, is working there now in the press room.
For my dad, working at Pacific Press meant everything. He loved working for the Lord, and he did anything for the Lord. Everything that came out of this plant was to help people know the Lord. When I see a product come out successfully from us printing, it just, you start imagining how many people it's going to affect in the way of the product will help people come closer to God.
One of the things that I really enjoy about working at Pacific Press, especially at Guide, is the nurturing component. We feed spiritually 10 to 14-year-olds. And while that might seem kind of abstract in the sense that we're not actually giving them food, I have heard of 30-year-olds that never quit reading Guide because not only did it bring fond memories of their childhood, but it continues to nurture them. It continues to help them grow spiritually.
In talking to employees, you will quickly discover that it's more than just a job. When we get letters that tell about a conversion story, about someone whose life has been changed, it gives energy to our plant and our facility because that's what these employees, all of us, feel is so important.
In the United States, you have this confluence of immigrants. So in a way, when you reach out to Hispanics and other groups in this division, you're fulfilling the mission of going out to the world. That's something that Pacific Press has been willing to do over the years, and is proud to keep doing for the sake of bringing these souls to the great hope of the return of Jesus.
The print media is extremely important, and one of the things that the press has done is drive that fact home to the general population of the church. I wish that everyone could have the experience knowing what this ministry has done, is doing, and what God has in future for it to do.
150 years of excellence, not just in the English work, but in the Hispanic work. And the services they've brought to our church has multiplied 1,000 times over the last 150 years. So thank you for the good work that is going on here at Pacific Press.
Back in the 1960s, Pacific Press published a book called Flee the Captor on the life of John Weidner. Recently, I had the opportunity to visit the site, Collonges, France, where the story took place. That is a story that just excited my young mind, and I want to say that Pacific Press continues to tell stories that change lives today.
So all throughout the South, in the early beginnings of Adventism, if you will, publishing, the Spirit of Prophecy, the Red Books as I call them, they played a pivotal role in reaching persons of color. And we can still see that today.
When you read a book and you read it in a print format, you remember it longer, you retain the information more, it just sticks in your brain more. So I'm excited to see that change. And Pacific Press has been there with the print. They also have the digital resources available, both in audio and digital books. So they're covering a broad spectrum, and I think that there's a lot more innovations coming in the future as our world continues to change and grow.
Pacific Press has played an integral role, a pivotal role in catapulting the church and its mission. It represents the church at its best, using technology to help be a catalyst to move the mission forward. And we think about the periodicals, we think about devotional books, we think about the proliferation of Ellen White's writings has played a significant role in unifying the church and also moving the church forward in its mission in a very significant way.
For 150 years, the mission has been clear. As we look toward the future, none of us know what tomorrow may bring or how much time that we have until the Lord's return. One thing is sure, that Pacific Press is committed to working closely with our church members, with church leadership, on finding ever increasingly more effective ways to share the gospel. It's the content that is developed, how it is presented, whether it's book form or digital. We don't know what the new generations may hold as far as technology, but we are committed to using the technology of the future to share Jesus with others.
Friends will be there I have loved long ago. Joy like a river around me will flow. Yet just a smile from my Savior I know will through the ages be glory for me. Oh, that will be glory for me, glory for me, glory for me, when by His grace I shall look on His face. That will be glory.